And we'll start that discussion by talking about, in the spirit of looking at the sort of guy who's underappreciated, Arshdeep Singh. So, Gurkirat, I am curious to get your thoughts about Arshdeep Singh. If you look at the stats alone, right, at least the generalized stats, they're not particularly impressive numbers in terms of, say, wickets taken or average or strike rate, some of the conventional metrics. But he's arguably been one of the most impressive bowlers in this entire IPL. And I am curious to get your thoughts about how A, his season has been overall, and B, what sort of improvements you think he's made to his game that have been different from, say, some of the past seasons where he might have been more successful, but he hasn't quite attracted as much acclaim from the pundits and so forth.
See, one thing that I definitely think has improved with his game is his pace has gone up. Now, even though I don't believe in a lot of cricketing cliches, but the one cliche is that I'm a fan of is that pace is pace. Now, I'll explain why I say that. What has happened is that now that Arshdeep has increased his pace, I think, which was earlier from 130, his average speed earlier was 130 to 135. Now it's between 135 to 140. Now, what it does is that whenever he misses his length, the margin of error that he has is slightly bigger as opposed to what it was earlier. Because when you're bowling, somewhere around 130, you miss your length in this format, especially bowling at the death, you're gone. But when you're bowling, slightly in the higher 130s or early 140s, which happens a lot with Kagiso Rabada, by the way, as well. If you look at the last two seasons, especially if you look at the 2020 season of the IPL, there were so many times that Rabada missed his length, but because he had the sheer pace, he was bowling at 144, 145, even 145 plus so many times. Despite missing his length, he was getting a lot of wickets because either batters were late while trying to hit him for a big shot, or they just missed the ball altogether and got bowled. I mean, one instance that comes to my mind is the super over between Punjab and Delhi in the first game of 2020.
Yeah, I remember that.
You look at that, he missed his length, I think, on 3 or 4 occasions, but he only conceded 2 runs. So definitely the increase in pace has helped him. The other thing that I liked about him this IPL was he was looking to explore angles. He was looking to come around the wicket to someone like Dinesh Karthik and cramping him for room, because Dinesh Karthik is someone who can play behind the wicket quite well, which not a lot of batters can. And once he knows that the bowler is only looking to target a wide Yorker or a Yorker on stumps, he's very quick to adjust and play the laps or play the sweeps or play the reverse laps, which he did with someone like Mustafizur. But what someone like Arshdeep did was that he was coming around the wicket to him, and he was not giving him that certainty of the line which he was going to bowl, which meant that even Karthik had to second guess himself and try out a few things, and eventually he dismissed Karthik. And he had actually dismissed Karthik even last year when Punjab and KKR were playing. So I think he's definitely become smarter. His pace has helped, but the one thing which I feel which he still lacks is wickets in the power play. And I think it will come with time once he starts bowling those lengths as well, because there are hardly any boundaries that he's conceded when he's been driven. Now, when you are getting driven, it means that you're bowling a length from where you can try to extract some kind of a swing, right? You're bowling the fullish length, which with someone like Mohammad Shami or Trent Bolt do in the power play. But when you're not going,
I think Trent Bolt's a very good example as a comparative, because he's also left arm, right? So he has a similar sort of. Yeah,
exactly. So when you're not going to bowl that length, you're also not going to get a lot of swing. There was one game where he did bowl in the power play, which was against CSK in Brabon, and then the other in Wankhede, where he did get the ball to swing a little and got those wickets. But I think this will come about with time, when he's also given the role which someone like Jasprit Bumrah has, where he sometimes has to bowl 2 in the power play, then 2 at the death. But because largely His role was to bowl 3 overs in the back end in the second half of the innings and 1 over to close out the power play. What you saw him bowl was a reflection of the role he had, which was to just cut down the runs all the time. And when you're looking to cut down the runs, you can't bowl fuller lengths. So this is something that we'll have to wait and see, and see how he progresses. But so far, I'd say when it comes to reading the game and understanding the situation, he's been brilliant. And the pace has definitely helped, because there were a couple of occasions where he did miss his lengths, but he got away with it, because one, he's been nailing those lengths quite well. So even as a batter, you sometimes don't expect the bowler to falter, and when you falter, you have that extra pace which allows you that greater margin of error.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting to bring that up, because that was often one of the great all-rounders of the game in the past, Ian Botham. That was often said about him, right? He at times he could be very quick, in fact, and so he would. There was this thing where often some batsmen would get very annoyed because they'd get dismissed after like a long hop from him, which was slower. But sometimes it almost felt like he was like, even if he missed his length occasionally, he'd been bowling so many good overs. And had been stringing up so many tight things and so forth, that it didn't really cause a problem as much. So in terms of my observations regarding Arshdeep, right? I think they largely correspond to what you were mentioning earlier, and specifically that he has increased his pace. Now, I think there's actually a technical reason behind that I'd like to just quickly mention here, and it comes down to the arm sort of speed that he has. He mentioned in interviews that he's been working on that, and I think the thing that has made him quicker is that if you look at previous videos of Arshdeep, when he would bowl, he would often bowl with his arm, like the arm that he's releasing the ball from, his left arm, from almost down near his like knees and so forth. Now he's sort of starting that delivery stride, or that when he's about to deliver the ball, he's starting it with it almost his arm like bent almost near his upper stomach, and he's basically, because of the work that he's put in to increase that arm speed, he's been able to release the ball at the exact same time. So there's more displacement on the ball, and when you have more displacement, scientifically, when they do bowlers studies and so forth, they show that the more displacement you're able to get on the ball, and if you're able to release it at the sort of comparable pace that is going to of your arm speed, that is going to result in more pace in general. So I think that's a very important technical thing that's worked on, and it shows his capability to learn and adapt, as you were mentioning earlier, which is very important. The other thing about specifically his game awareness that you were bringing up, he's often been able to deny set batsmen at the death boundaries. And like sometimes, as you mentioned with Karthik, who's been in stupendous form, he's done that by going, around the wicket. He's been playing with those sort of angles, but he's also done it by setting his fields. I remember Ian Bishop talking in, it was some sort of analysis he was doing, where he was talking about how Arshdeep is very different from a lot of uncapped Indian bowlers in that he actually sets his fields. Mayank is a very new captain, and so often Arshdeep, having played for a couple of years for Punjab, has the confidence of his captain to actually do that. And so he's able to set his fields, and sometimes he'll set it up in a way where he will set it up for, say, the wide Yorker, but he'll have a fielder out in the deep or around square leg or deep fine leg. And he sort of is able to hoodwink batsmen because he's able to bowl the lengths for the wide Yorker, but then occasionally slip in the shorter one. And because there is that man out in the deep, they're not exactly sure how to deal with it. So there's that unpredictability, sometimes is also intentional, and that's been helping him out a lot.
The one point that I like to make here is that sometimes bowlers set the field for a bouncer and go for the Yorker, wherein they have the third man and the point inside the circle, and sometimes they set the field for a Yorker and go for a bouncer, right? What I have found in my experience, again, this is not something that I can quantify by numbers, but I think when you set the field for a bouncer and then go for a Yorker, you pay the price a lot more than when you set the field for a Yorker and go for a bouncer, because you are able to beat the batter with speed or with angle. But sometimes when you go for the Yorker and you miss the length, just getting a little bit of bat either through point, or just finer of third man gives the batter a boundary. And I thought what Arshdeep did quite well this season was the double bluff.
Yeah.
He's actually set the field for the Yorker and bowled the bouncer. The other thing that you mentioned about his fields, mine goes back to the Gujarat game where Odian went for 2 sixes on the last two deliveries. That game was dead and buried. Punjab were able to come back because of how Arshdeep had bowled, and Gill was batting quite well and was settled, but he was still able to deny Gill and then Hardik so many boundaries. He crammed up Hardik and Gill for room, and then when he went for those wide Yorkers, he had a deep third man. He also had a sweeper cover and a long off, which is something that he had for someone like MS Dhoni as well when they were playing in Wankhede.
Yeah.
So that way, you brought up an excellent point that he was setting his own field, because he knows that this is where I am going to bowl, and he's confident about nailing his lengths, that that batters won't be able to hit him across the line through the leg side if he's going to bowl wide of the wide Yorkers outside the off stump. So their only option is to hit him through the offside, and then he has enough protection over there to make sure that it's only at max 2 runs and not a boundary.
Right. And all of those factors, why they're so important, right, is that he has been one of the most economical pacers throughout this tournament, and he's often bowled in crunch situations, like you mentioned that Gujarat game, where he's had a immediate match-winning impact on the proceedings, where there's been situations where the game looks like it's dead and buried, and his economical overs, where he's going for 5 or 6, have suddenly altered it, where the target is suddenly now a trickier one than the chasing side anticipated, for instance. So I think all in all, we've been thoroughly impressed by Arshdeep Singh. So let's move on now and talk about what do we think his chances are in the future, both in the IPL and internationally. So in terms of Arshdeep, I think Gurkirat, the ceiling for him is very high, because I think he has a very sharp cricketing brain, right? As we were mentioning, he's very astute. He sets his own fields. A young bowler that's very rare. So I think that he can go a far way. Now, I know you mentioned this season he hasn't been doing that well in the power play, but if you look at like 2019 and 2020, for example, he has actually been able to get a lot of wickets in that stage of the game, and he can swing the ball. I've seen him swing it in even the under 19 level both ways. So my sort of anticipation is that he will play for India, especially in T20s. He will play. He's already shown the skill set for that, but I think he can also become an ODI regular. Tests is a little bit hard because there are factors that are not, there is an established bowling attack already, but I could actually see him being a reserve bowler even for that in the pecking order because of his left arm angle that he has. That's a rarity amongst even the Indian bowling attack currently. There often needs to be some sort of variety. So that's my viewpoint on it. I do think he has a potential genuinely to become a sort of a an all format sort of player at hand. What are your thoughts?
I wouldn't go too far. I'd like to see how he does in the South Africa series, which is coming up, because he's been selected. I'd like to see what is the role which is given to him, because like I mentioned, this season his role for the Punjab team was quite different. He was either closing out the power play or coming and bowling a tight spell when it was required. So which is why I said that to judge his power play performance wouldn't be great because of the role that he had. Having said that, in the IPL, I do see him becoming an icon player of sorts for Punjab. Someone who he's already has had 3 seasons. He was retained. I think that Punjab will keep him and try and build a brand identity around him, because
he's also locally from the area. That helps
because
as well.
IPL is very much about building brands also. A lot of cricketers, especially this ahead of this mega auction, were mainly retained, or their brand value was also a factor in terms of retention, and they were not entirely retained on cricketing reasons. uh, you know we You can especially look at few big players like someone like Rohit, Virat, or MS. They don't offer that much purely from the cricketing point of view, or from what they offer from a brand point of view. So I
Right.
think in the IPL, we could look at him as becoming someone like that for the Punjab franchise. Obviously, being a local player helps, and if he keeps performing, becomes an India regular, then that will only help his case.
Fair enough.